Prime Minister. Closed question number one, Dr. Julian Lewis.
Number one, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We assess our defence spending constantly as to whether it meets our obligations and keeps our country safe. As figures published last month show, we are meeting the 2% NATO target this year.
Dr. Julian Lewis.
As the Prime Minister and indeed the Chancellor know, quality is not the issue with our armed forces, but quantity is. Given that we used to spend regularly between 4 and 5% of GDP on defence when we last faced a threat on the continent and a major terrorist campaign, should we not be aiming at a 3% target rather than the bare NATO minimum figure?
The point I'd make to my honourable friend, he's right, we do face very severe threats in our world, is the only way to have strong defence is to have a strong economy. That is absolutely key. We made some very clear commitments about the size of our armed forces, about the successor to the Trident submarine, and also the vital equipment programme where we have the aircraft carriers and the other equipment vital to our armed services that are coming through. Those things are only possible because we closed the deficit in our MOD and the mess that we found when we became the government, and we have a strong economy.
Harriet Harman.
10 years ago, the 7/7 bombers cruelly took 52 precious lives. We remember them, the families' courage and the injured, and we defy the terrorists. Mr. Speaker, last month, the Prime Minister celebrated the Magna Carta, which set out that those who govern must be constrained in their exercise of power to protect those they govern. Our Human Rights Act is the very embodiment of those values. If he accepts that in a democracy there needs to be an effective check on executive power, even though at times it can be uncomfortable for government, will he abandon his plans to water down the Human Rights Act?
Well, first of all, can I very much agree with the Right Honourable Lady with what she said about 7/7, about the 10-year anniversary, about the bravery and the dignity of those families that lost their loved ones. And she, like I, took part in the commemorations yesterday that I thought were fitting and a permanent reminder to the threat we face and the work we must do to face down the evil of these terrorists and their narrative of extremism. The point she makes about the Magna Carta, I would say, demonstrates that there were human rights before the Human Rights Act. And the point I would make is our proposed reform is to have a British Bill of Rights so that more of these judgments are made by British judges in British courts.
Harriet Harman.
But it's very important that we're unhesitating in our compliance with international standards on this. Otherwise, it gives a strong signal to other countries that we want to undermine those standards. But there have been mixed messages from the government. Last week, senior government sources briefed the newspapers that the Prime Minister's view was that withdrawal from the ECHR, the European Convention on Human Rights, is not going to happen. But the Home Secretary, the Justice Secretary and the Leader of the House have indicated that they want to leave. So can the Prime Minister make it absolutely clear that Britain will be staying in the European Convention on Human Rights?
Well, I think, as I said to the Right Honourable Lady before, there's a danger of believing everything you read in the newspapers. Our intention is very clear: to pass a British Bill of Rights, which we believe is compatible with our membership of the Council of Europe. But as I've said at this dispatch box before, no one should be in any doubt when it comes to issues like prisoner voting and things like that. I am clear these issues should be decided in this House of Commons. And I think it's vital. So let's pass a British Bill of Rights. Let's give more rights to these things to be decided in British courts. And let's recognise we had human rights in this country long before Labour's Human Rights Act.
If, as he reassures us, we're staying in the European Convention, we might as well keep the Human Rights Act, which at least means we can go and get it in force in our courts. Mr. Speaker, 10 years ago, the UK was awarded the 2012 Olympics and Paralympics. When he took office, the Prime Minister promised that these Games would see an increase in participation in sport. So can he tell us, has the number of people taking part in sport gone up or down since the Olympics?
Participation in sport has gone up since the Olympics. and it has been a success, and we should all remember what an excellent Olympic Games it was. And we've also seen a real success in primary schools, where we're seeing more activity in terms of PE, and the primary school sports partnerships are working very well.
Harriet Harman.
I don't know what it says in his briefing folder, but he's completely wrong on that. Since 2010, the number of people taking part in sport has gone down, and children at school are doing less sport too. Does he agree that what we now need is a proper national strategy for sports participation, so we don't miss the golden opportunity presented by the Olympics, an opportunity his government is so far squandering?
Right. Are we, we're sitting comfortably. There are 1.4 million more people playing sport once a week than when we won the bid to host the Olympic Games. Right. The recent Active People survey...
They don't know. Order! Mr. Bryant, you are now an esteemed member of Her Majesty's Opposition Shadow Cabinet. Well, whether he's esteemed or not, he's a member of the Shadow Cabinet. The Prime Minister.
Well, he might be esteemed by you, Mr. Speaker, but some of us take a different view. As a result of the PE and school sports premium, average time spent on PE at primary level has increased to over 2 hours a week. 91% of schools have reported an increase in the quality of PE teaching. 96% of schools have reported... I know they don't like facts, but when they ask a factual question, they should welcome a factual answer. I've got all day, Mr. Speaker.
However long it takes, the answer will be heard.
There's not much else on today, Mr. Speaker, so... and more than 8 in 10 schools are seeing a rise in the number of children doing sport in schools. The Olympics was a success for Britain. Sports participation has gone up. More is now happening in our schools, and we will build on that legacy.
The facts we don't like is that since the Olympics, participation in sport has gone down, especially amongst children, and he should get out and sort that out. Mr. Speaker, in the English manifesto that the Conservative Party published, he promised that before making changes to the Constitution on English votes for English laws, that he would, and I quote, consult the House of Commons Procedure Committee prior to seeking approval from the whole House to the proposed standing order changes. When did he do this?
There have been consultations with the head of that committee, and there's plenty of time. And I have to say to Labour, at least we published an English manifesto. Now look, I think it's a very simple choice. It's a very simple choice for this House. And for once, why don't we talk about the substance rather than the process? Let me talk about the substance. Right. It's very simple. Post-devolution, we have a problem of unfairness, which is English MPs have no say on Scottish issues, and yet Scottish MPs have a say on English issues. Now, that is the problem. We are proposing a very simple measure, which is that legislation shouldn't be passed on English matters against the will of English MPs. It's a very modest proposal. Is she really saying the Labour Party is going to oppose that proposal?
Harriet Harman.
We agree there's a problem, and we agree there's a problem, and we agree there needs to be change, but it's got to be done properly. Constitutional change has got to be done properly, and indeed he said at last week's Prime Minister's questions, he actually said, we'll publish our proposals shortly and Parliament will have plenty of time to consider and vote on them. And, you know, he can't have consulted the Procedure Committee because it hasn't even been set up yet. So the Prime Minister should recognise the strength of feeling I think that there is about proper processes to get to this change, strength of feeling on all sides of the House. I think he should consult properly, or actually he's breaking a promise he made in his manifesto.
She talks about proper processes. We have published proposals. We're having a debate in Parliament, and there'll be a vote in Parliament. You know, I think the Labour Party, frankly, has got to get off the fence and tell us, do you support this modest proposal or not? We're still waiting for an answer.
Chris Davis.
Question 2, Mr. Speaker.
I have meetings with Cabinet colleagues and others, and in addition to my duties in this House, I shall have further such meetings later today.
Davis.
Does my right honourable friend agree with me that rural businesses in my constituency of Brecon and Radnorshire, such as BSW Timber, who he visited during the election campaign, are benefiting from this government's long-term economic plan? And can I also ask the Prime Minister what more his government can do to further promote apprenticeships and create jobs in all sectors of this vital rural economy?
Well, first of all, can I welcome my honourable friend to his place, and so much I enjoyed the visit to his constituency and to that specific business. It is a business that's taken on a lot of employees and a lot of apprentices in recent years, and the claimant count in his constituency is down by 54% since 2010. What more we can do is encourage companies like this one to invest in training in apprentices, because that will be such a key to our future, and that is what we've got to make sure that we do, and that will only happen if we stick to our long-term economic plan.
Mr. Angus Robertson.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. This week we commemorate the worst atrocity in Europe since the Second World War, the Srebrenica genocide. In a genocidal act, 8,372 unarmed boys and men were taken out of what was supposed to be a United Nations safe area and were murdered. Will the Prime Minister commit to do everything in his power to ensure that this genocidal act is remembered, and do everything that he can to get the international community to mark this as well?
Well, I absolutely agree with the right honourable gentleman about this issue. It was the largest act of genocide since the Holocaust on the mainland of Europe. As he said, 8,300 people murdered. The first thing is to be very clear, it was genocide. And to say to people who question that, they are genocide deniers. I'm very proud of the fact that Britain has the second largest set of commemorations and events to mark the anniversary of these dreadful events. We've also been holding the pen at the UN in drafting a resolution to try and bring the world together to make sure it is remembered in the right way. And we should continue to do all we can to keep this at the front and centre of European and world politics, so people realise this was a genocide and we must learn the lessons from it.
Angus Robertson.
I commend the Prime Minister for his answer and for his efforts, and the Welsh First Minister Carwyn Jones, who's hosting a commemorative event in Cardiff today, and Scotland's First Minister Nicola Sturgeon, who's doing a commemorative event in Scotland on Friday. But Bosnia's suffering has continued since the genocide and since the end of the war. Unemployment in Bosnia is more than 40%. Amongst young people, it's over 75%. More than half of the young people of Bosnia are considering leaving that country. Will the Prime Minister do everything that he can, together with European partners, to support political and economic progress for Bosnia-Herzegovina and give the people there real hope for a better future?
Well, I think the honourable gentleman is absolutely right, and that's why I met with the Bosnian President this week to discuss some of those issues, as well as talking about commemorating and remembering Srebrenica. I think what matters is making sure that the institutions in Bosnia work better and the politicians work better together in understanding their past and their shared future. I think it's very important we keep the door of access to the European Union open, but for that to happen, the institutions need improving, issues need to be properly dealt with, corruption and problems need to be addressed, but there's no doubt in my mind that the pathway to membership of the European Union has helped in Bosnia as it can help in the rest of the Western Balkans, and it's vital we keep that door open.
Caroline Noakes.
7-year-old Jagger Curtis from Romsey suffers from Duchenne's muscular dystrophy. Every day he has waited for first NHS England and now NICE to make a decision about Translana is a day that threatens his mobility. Last week's decision to delay potentially for up to 5 months was a bitter blow. What action can my right honourable friend take to make sure that NICE makes that decision with the utmost speed?
Well, what I'd say to my honourable friend, who quite rightly raises this issue, is these are incredibly difficult decisions, and we know how hard they are for patients and for their families. I think it's right that it's expert clinicians at NHS England and not politicians who make these funding decisions based on the evidence that's available. As she knows, NICE hasn't yet made a final decision on these drugs, so patients and their families and other experts can feed into their evidence gathering and consultation process. She asked what we can do. I think there are two things, frankly. One is, when we have these drugs that cost over £400,000 per patient per year, I think it's right to ask some pretty challenging questions of the companies concerned, and we should. And the second thing is, we must keep investing in our rare disease research, in genomics, and making sure that the NHS takes up these treatments rapidly. That's the sort of health service we want to build.
Kirsten Oswald.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I put it to him again that in his manifesto for England, which was the only part of the UK where he won the election, the Prime Minister promised on English votes for English laws to consult the House of Commons Procedure Committee before seeking approval from the whole House to the proposed standing order changes. We all know the committee's membership has not been agreed by the House. It won't meet until next week, and the evil vote is next Wednesday. Can the Prime Minister please tell us why he is breaking his manifesto promise?
We are consulting the whole of the House of Commons, and the whole of the House of Commons will have a vote. And I think when the House of Commons comes to have its vote, it might want to consider what the leader of the Scottish National Party said back in 2007. You might find this interesting. He said this to the then Prime Minister in 2007: "Is it not completely iniquitous that English MPs are not able to decide matters in Scotland, but Scottish MPs from the UK parties can vote on matters which only impact on England?" That was the view. Now, given that our modest proposal would actually restrict the SNP from far fewer votes than their own self-denying ordinance does, I would think they should vote wholeheartedly with the government on this modest proposal.
Michelle Donnellan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As the Prime Minister knows, my constituency of Chippenham covers 4 market towns, but our high streets have declined under years of Labour's neglect. What support can the Prime...
Order! The Honourable Lady must be heard, and she will be.
Offer market towns like Corsham, Chippenham, Melksham and Bradford-on-Avon.
Well, first of all, let me welcome my honourable friend to her place. I do know her constituency well and spent a lot of time there with her before the election. What I'd say to her is the offer of devolution is not limited to cities. We're just as open to proposals from towns, counties and districts. But I'd say what we need to help our high streets is a strong economy, to press ahead with these local plans, to have deregulation of the class orders that sometimes prevents development taking place. And I would also argue, in the case of market towns, we should make parking easier and preferably free.
Jonathan Reynolds.
The decision to indefinitely pause the electrification of the Transpennine rail line through Staley Bridge and Moseley means that my constituents face many more years of delayed trains, cramped journeys and less frequent services. Are these really the characteristics, Prime Minister, of a northern powerhouse?
Isn't it typical of the Labour Party today that instead of trying to get behind the northern powerhouse and building a balanced economy, says that there is an indefinite pause. That is not the case. We will be pressing ahead with this investment. And I think it's right that the Labour Party should be supporting it.
Mark Spencer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Will the Prime Minister lend his support to plans to extend the Robin Hood line in North Nottinghamshire so that those people living in former coalfield communities can get access to transport and to employment, and those people who want to come as tourists can enjoy all that Sherwood Forest has to offer?
No, I think the idea of the Robin Hood line is a very, very positive one. It's something we want to support, and we hope to make progress in the months ahead.
Valerie Vaz.
No. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last Friday at Walsall Football Club Stadium, there were tears, flowers and Walsall shirts and scarves as we remembered Joel Richards, aged 19, Adrian Evans, his uncle, and his grandfather, Patrick Evans, all Sadler's fans who were killed in Tunisia. So could I ask the Prime Minister if he could outline what steps he will take to ensure that bereaved families and those survivors of atrocities can have help immediately and in the future.
Well, can I thank the Honourable Lady for her question? And I know the thoughts and condolences of the whole House go out to the families of the Honourable Lady's constituents. And I'm glad to hear that Walsall Football Club are facilitating this very fitting tribute, and it was very moving hearing about that on television. As I announced to the House last week, I've asked the Cabinet Secretary for advice on a ministerial committee to ensure that work is properly coordinated across government to support all those who've been affected. I was very struck yesterday talking to the victims of the 7/7 bombings that they had been supported across many years in many different ways, covering all sorts of different issues in their own lives and also in the way they wanted to commemorate those terrible events in London. And I want to make sure we do it as well in the case of the Tunisian atrocities, and so that's exactly what that committee will be set up to do.
Christopher Pincher.
And can I associate myself with the Prime Minister's remarks about the families of the victims of Tunisia, particularly the family of my constituent Sue Davey. Mr. Speaker, in the last 3 years, unemployment in Tamworth has fallen faster than anywhere else in the country. Will my right honourable friend encourage high-tech firms like JLR and BMW to be the motors of the Midlands engine, and remind the Labour Party that Ed Ball's comments that our long-term economic plan would choke off jobs and growth was just plain wrong?
Well, I'm delighted that Tamworth has this record, not least because it has such an association with Conservative Prime Ministers down the years and Tamworth manifestos. But I think the point he makes is a good one. People trying to say that the jobs we've created are part-time and low-paid need to look at what's happening in places like the West Midlands, where you see a growth in manufacturing, in engineering, in jobs that have long-term successful careers attached to them, and we want more of that.
Jeff Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. If the Prime Minister really is committed to the Northern Powerhouse, he'll know an essential element of that is improved transport connectivity between the key cities of Manchester and Leeds, and this is now under threat. Given the vague and evasive answer he gave earlier, will the Prime Minister now join me in welcoming the Manchester Evening News campaign to get the electrification of the Transpennine line back on track?
I can certainly commit to that, because I said a minute ago, this is a pause, not a stop. And we are absolutely committed to making sure this goes ahead. And we also want to get rid of the Pacer trains that were there all those years under Labour.
John Redwood.
Doesn't the Greek crisis show that when negotiating with the EU, it is very important to be clear about what you want, and you should not accept their first or second offer because they would improve it under pressure?
I'm sure there are all sorts of things to learn from the Greek experience, but I do fear for the future of that country. Obviously, we want to see Greece and the Eurozone come to an agreement, but we have to be prepared for all eventualities and to make sure that whether it is helping British tourists or British businesses or British pensioners living in Greece, we've taken all the plans and all the precautions that are necessary. My approach to negotiation, I have to say, is a little bit different to the Greek approach. That is why I've been round to see every Prime Minister and President President in Europe to talk through what it is that Britain wants to see in terms of change in Europe and change for our membership in Europe, and I believe it will be successful.
Reza Pierce.
What does the Prime Minister have to say in response to new figures from Age UK showing there are over 1 million elderly people in this country who are not getting the basic help they need to be washed, dressed or fed?
Well, we need to see a continued improvement in social care in our country, and we need to continue to help pensioners in our country, and pensioner poverty is at an all-time low in our country because this party has kept its promises to uprate the basic state pension, to support the pensioners' benefits and to make sure people have dignity in their old age.
Sir Roger Gale.
Speaker, when my right honourable friend speaks to President Hollande in the immediate future, will he make it plain that he expects that the port of Calais will be kept open now and in the future for lawful travel in both directions?
I think my honourable friend makes a very important point. I had a very good discussion with President Hollande last week. I think we have seen more action by the French police in terms of arresting the ringleaders and trying to keep roads and ports open. As I've said at this dispatch box before, I think it's important we don't engage in finger-pointing with the French. We recognise this as a shared problem. Our juxtaposed border controls in Calais work well for Britain and, I believe, can work well for France, and we should continue to work together to deal with this problem.
Karen Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My constituents in Bristol South are still waiting for universal credit to be rolled out to them. In fact, they're still waiting for a timetable of planned rollout. We're about to hear about the latest stages of the government's welfare reforms. When will he finish the last one?
Well, I think I'd make absolutely no apology for taking universal credit at a deliberate pace. All of us, many of us in this House can remember what happened when Labour introduced tax credits in one go and the people coming to our constituency surgeries with problem after problem. So it's quite right to do this at a deliberate pace, but I can promise her universal credit will be coming to Bristol South soon.
Maria Caulfield.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Every child deserves the best start in life, not least those who need adoption. Can my right honourable friend set out how the £30 million of extra funding will help even more children find a loving home?
Well, I'm welcome to my honourable friend, and to say how important it is, I think, that we get this right. We saw a big increase in adoption in the last Parliament because of the changes that we made, and what we're putting on the table in this Parliament is extra money, but also the proposal to create regional adoption agencies so that, counties can actually, and other adoption agencies can come together. Because what matters is finding a loving family for the child rather than ensuring that it's in the precise geographical area where that child might be in care, because a loving home is what matters above all.
Gabe.
I'm told, Mr. Speaker, that the Prime Minister may shortly be planning a vote using evil to repeal our hunting laws. Will this be a case of English hunting for English foxes?
No, it'll be an opportunity for the House, as we were talking about earlier, an opportunity for the House of Commons to debate an issue and then have a vote. I don't know what everyone else came here for, but I think that's quite a good idea.
Mr. Tim Lawton.
Mr. Speaker, I'm sure the Prime Minister had time to study the Building Great Britain's report from the 1001 Critical Gaze All-Party Group earlier this year, which put the cost of perinatal mental illness and child maltreatment at £23 billion a year. Will he commit to focusing the welcome additional CAM spending on a pre-troubled families programme, which invests in strong attachments between parents and babies at the outset as the best way to secure well-rounded children brought up in strong, loving families?
I think my honourable friend, who has great experience of these matters, makes a very good point in that we are looking at how to have proper parity between mental and physical health, and everything we can do to help strengthen families should be part of our agenda of genuinely tackling poverty, because we want to tackle the causes of poverty. We look at the causes of poverty alongside worklessness and debt and addiction and the rest of it. Family breakdown is a big cause of poverty, so the work he talks about is vitally important.
Jo Cox.
Mr. Speaker, with people queuing to access food banks in my constituency, does the Prime Minister think it's a priority for the country to bring back fox hunting.
I think the priority for the country is to keep going with a growing economy that's seen 2 million more people in work, to keep going with an economy that's going to see 3 million apprentices in the next Parliament, to keep going with an economy that's cutting taxes for hard-working people. That's the priority, and that's what you're going to hear about in a minute or two.
Heather Wheeler!
Derbyshire is at the heart of the Midlands engine powering the economy of the country. Sorry, Mr. Speaker, I think I've lost my voice. Would the Prime Minister congratulate the workers at Bombardier for winning the £358 million contract to supply 45 more trains for London, securing local jobs for the next 35 years?
My honourable friend is absolutely right that just as I was saying that the automotive industry has been so important for the West Midlands in recent years, the growth in the train industry has been so important for the East Midlands in recent years, and the progress at Bombardier is truly impressive. I had great pleasure of visiting there earlier in the year, and they even let me drive a train. I wasn't very successful at that, but the company is doing very well. It's investing for the future, it's providing trains for our country, and that is putting through jobs and skills for the whole region.
Justin Madders.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I was surprised to learn in response to questions from myself and others that the government doesn't actually know where the Northern Powerhouse is. So, given the...
George is selling it! George is selling it! Tell him, George!
Order! We do have a bit of other business to get on to, but the honourable gentleman must be heard. Mr. Madders.
So, given the recent cancellation or pausing of major transport projects in the north, is it not in fact the case that the only place where the Northern Powerhouse can be found is in the Prime Minister's imagination?
The truth is, the Labour Party ignored the North for years, and they cannot bear the fact that it's a Conservative Prime Minister and a Conservative Chancellor sitting for a seat in the North West that is putting these issues firmly on the agenda and funding them.